Hello world, and we are back. My name's Kyle Fischl. This is going to be episode 210 of my poker vlog. For this one, I am back at Orange City Racing and Card Club. I will actually be there March 7th and 8th. Not a whole lot of notice, but if you're in an area and want to make a video, I'll be there those 2 days as well. Once for a 2-5 game, once for a live stream. Should be a lot of fun. And now, let's go over some poker hands. We arrive at Orange City Racing and Card Club, looking to turn around some of our recent performances, which have been quite bad to say the least. And on the first interesting hand, in a not optimal angle,
You're obviously in the wrong place.
we look down at Ace King offsuit in the big blind, and with one limp, a middle position player raises to $25. This player had been quite tight from the limited time I've seen. This is the first hand I've seen him play in probably 45 minutes. So out of position versus a player who I think is very much on the tighter side, we're going to choose to just call this one. The limper calls as well, so we end up going 3 ways to a flop, which comes king 4 deuce with 2 spades. I check in flow, and the preflop aggressor puts out a bet of $40. At this point, I think he's a little heavier weighted towards king, queen, ace, king, maybe king, jack, so I actually think that I'm well ahead of him. I'm not too worried about flush draws, and since my opponent only has about $300 left in his stack, we're going to just call this one. I think I can easily get it all in on the turn, and if the turn goes check, check, I think that a slight overbet pot on the river bet will get all the money in. When I make the call, the limper decides to fold, so we end up going heads up to a turn card. I'm hoping for a disconnected blank, and that's exactly what we get in the 7 of clubs. Couldn't be happier with this card. I think all king X is going to continue betting. If my opponent checks, he probably has like 8s, 9s, 10s, I guess. But to this card, my opponent bets $80. He only has about 150 behind, so we're just going to get it all in right now. When I announce all in, my opponent snap calls and then says one time. To me, that sounds like quite a made hand and not a drawing hand. Did I just find the case king and have my opponent have pocket kings? Well, the river is the 10 of diamonds. I've already shown my hand, and my opponent finally shows pocket 7s. So that middling safe complete blank card that I thought I was looking at was actually a 2-outer, and I end up doubling up my opponent. At this point, I feel like actually cursed at Orange City.
This place is cursed.
I seem to run so bad when I come in town and keep having to post losses at this property. Minus over $300 on the first hand played is going to be quite a difficult hole to get out of. But a bunch of players leave all at the same time. I'm able to get my optimal seat, and when we're playing shorthanded, I'm able to pick up a few smaller, less notable pots. Help me start moving in the right direction. Before I look down at pocket 9s in the cutoff, with 2 limps I raise to $30. The button and both limpers decide to call, so we end up going 4 ways to a flop, which comes Bink, Jack, 9, 7, Rainbow. No one should really have pocket jacks, as there's 2 limp callers and 1 player who's quite aggressive that I'm very confident would 3-bet pocket jacks. But 10-8 is pretty possible in any of these opponents' ranges. But the board is generally dry, as I'm not really worried about any turn cards besides exactly an 8 or a 10. When it checks to me, I'm going to check this one back, give my opponents a chance to catch up, or turn random garbage into bluffs, as this table had been quite aggressive in general, and I think we benefit from trapping some of this aggression. The button checks, and the turn is the 4 of spades, now 2 spades on board. Both of the limpers check to me, so neither of them have a straight or a very strong hand. I can't afford to let this check through a second time, so we're going to bet pretty small here, under half pot. Would love to get crying calls from random 10s, maybe pocket 8s. King, queen might call a bet, but not want to bet themselves. Lots of stuff that's going to call this small bet, and to $50, the opponent on the button raises to $175.
Big mistake. Big. Huge.
I have approximately 800 in my stack. My opponent has approximately 1,000, so he covers me. When the limpers fold to me, the board is quite a bit more dynamic at this point. I think my opponent could easily have like king 10 of spades, 5-6, pocket 8s, maybe ace 10 or 7-6 for the very low equity bluff raises. But when there's a much more dynamic of a board and just tons of cards that would hit the river where I really wouldn't know which ones I'm trying to fade, I think the only option here is to go all in. Maybe my opponent just has 2 pair and he's going to call and be nearly stone dead. But after my jam for about $800, my opponent basically snap folds. So I think he was just testing the waters with some aggression with straight air. But as we saw in the last hand, when our opponents have straight air like pocket sevens, I can't seem to fade 2 outers. So I'm pretty happy to just get a fold here and win a decent sized pot. On the next interesting hand, I look down at 9-10 of hearts from the low jack. Under the gun makes it $20. This is going to just be a call for me, especially as he should have the tightest range, raising from under the gun. And this brings along the hijack. So we go 3 ways to a flop, which is 10-5 deuce rainbow with 1 heart. So that seems pretty good. My opponent continues to bet $40. Top pair, I'm not going anywhere. And I'm somewhat surprised to see the hijack make the call as well. So we're 3 ways to a turn card, which is the 7 of hearts. We pick up a flush draw, which is very nice, and retain top pair. But this doesn't slow the opponent down. He bets $60. So I think a lot of his ace-x just gives up on the turn here. So he probably has a better 10 than me at this point. Additionally, with a player behind, this is quite a dicey spot and should probably be a fold here at least some of the time. But top pair and a flush draw is too strong for me to get away from it. So I make the call. And the player to my left folds. We are heads up to a river card, which is the jack of clubs. I somewhat like this card as it reduces the chance my opponent has jack 10. And I think a lot of his 10s have to check on this river card. But this opponent doesn't. He bets $60 again. To me, this looks like a clear blocker bet. In the past, when I've raised the clearest of blocker bets, I seem to always get tank called anyway. So as I'm thinking about this, that thought kind of leaves the table. And then it kind of comes back, but now I've been thinking for like 15 seconds, and now I think a raise looks even weaker. I do think it's possible my opponent just goes all 3 streets with like ace, king, ace, queen. I see this in this room sometimes, although I don't subscribe to this thought process. Just betting 3 streets with ace high and not willing to give up. Maybe my opponent's going for pocket 8s, pocket 9s here. I eventually level myself into thinking that 60 is just a really good price. I get a lot of information as well when I make this call, see how my opponent's playing. When I call, my opponent has ace 10. So I'm definitely pipped, but I did not need to call this river bet, I don't think. So we end up losing this one quite unnecessarily.
Man, you are one pathetic loser.
That is followed by ace queen on an ace high board, betting 3 streets small, and my opponent also having ace queen, so we chop that one up before we arrive at the next hand of note. I'm in the under the gun $10 straddle, and when it folds away the small blind, he raises to $40. I'm not going to fold pocket deuces. They seem to be the hand of my last video. So I'm feeling pretty confident with the ducks in these days. And when the flop comes queen 7 deuce, the confidence could not be higher. When my opponent checks to me, although this board is super dry and I think he has a whole lot of nothing, when we play deuces and flop a set, we're just going to bet here. So I slightly down bet his pre-flop bet. I bet $30, hoping that he'll even hold on with like king jack, jack 10, ace highs, stuff like that. And for $30, I am happy to see my opponent call. When the turn is the 4 of hearts and he checks to me, I'm not going to slow down, still go for a very small sizing, try to milk him. Maybe he has like 7-8. That one might call 2 small bets and give up river, but on a full rainbow, we're definitely putting in the second barrel. I bet $60, and my opponent thinks for a little bit, and then makes it $185.
Big mistake. Big. Huge.
In the moment, there wasn't even a doubt on my mind that I wasn't good here. Never even considered for a second my opponent had queens or 7s. I don't by any means consider myself a live read expert, but my opponent just did not seem too strong, didn't look like he had a whole lot of anything, which really means I should probably call here, but I already 3-bet ripped 1 time this session on the turn, so I'm thinking if I do it a second time, it's going to look extra bluffy, and my opponent might level himself into calling if he had a hand like ace-queen, which on this dry, unconnected flop might feel like they have too strong of hand to bet and can happily check call down, but announce themselves on the turn when their opponent has put some money in and they're hoping to cooler like king, queen, queen, jack. So I suppose hoping my opponent has a strong queen, I decide to go all in again. Because my opponent only has about $800 behind, I have him covered. But again, on this time I get a snap fold, so maybe people are just pushing buttons against me, trying to make the video. When the opponents don't even take a second to think after facing the all-in, I guess they're really just clicking buttons out here in Orange City. I win another small one before I look down at pocket aces in the under the gun spot. Please take 1 second and hit the like button. Thank you. With a button straddled to $10, the big blind limps. I decided to make it $35 with aces. Would love to see a 3-bet as this table had been 3-betting a little bit more than I'd say normally at a 2-5 game. But what I don't want to happen is a late position player call, the button call, and the big blind call. You know, it's highly unlikely that you're going to have the nuts with aces when it goes 4 ways. But on an ace 3-3 board, you are pretty dang close. At this point, just praying to the poker gods that someone has a 3 so I can get stacks in. When the big blind checks to me, I think that you should definitely check your range out of position a majority of the time. And when you have the entire board and then some locked up, you should absolutely do it. So I check, maybe someone will stab with garbage, maybe someone will have like pocket 8s and feel pretty good when it's checked to them. But it checks to the button and he does not disappoint, he bets $50. I love this, please have a 3. Please have ace jack. So many hands that are just stone dead that we might even get stacks in with. Folds back to me, we're definitely slow playing. I choose to just call this one. The later position player decides to fold, so we're heads up to a turn card, which is the 7 of diamonds. Honestly, at this point, I'll even take him having 4 or 5 of diamonds. We are definitely going to learn how strong he is with what he does on this action. If he bets, he definitely has a 3 or an ace. If he checks, he's got a whole lot of nothing. When I check it to him, praying to see a bet, but we get a check. Looks like my opponent has absolute air. So when the river is the 4 of spades, I'm going to bet very small here. I choose a sizing of $60. I think if my opponent has full air, at least some of the time, he's going to go for the bluff raise. As I believe my bet looks a lot like a blocker bet, and good players, when they sense weakness, can sometimes just put the pedal to the metal and try to blast an opponent off whatever holding they may have. Unfortunately for me, this does not happen this time. My opponent folds pretty quickly, and I normally would not show this one, but this actually qualified for the high hand at the moment. Ace is full of 3s. Unfortunately for me, it did not hold up, but that is the reason why I showed this one. A little bit later, we look down at pocket jacks on the button, and early push player raises to $25, and there's 2 callers. When it folds back to me, I'm really not sure exactly what sizing I want to go with this one. I think 100 is a pretty good size, but I think that makes us go 4 ways, which would make jacks absolutely shrivel up. I think anything bigger than 150 is going to guarantee get nothing but folds here, unless my opponents have queens plus. I don't think I need to go insanely big here, as I'm going to be on the button and get to play the whole hand in position. So I settle on a sizing of $140. Let me know what you think of this sizing in the comments below. But on this day, in this specific circumstance, everyone folds and we take down about $80 in dead money. We then 3-bet ace queen and take down another pot with no resistance. And before I get into the next hand, I have to preface it by giving my opponent some backstory. My opponent in the next hand, to say he's willing to throw the money around is an understatement. This opponent played queen 7 in a 3-bet pot, called flop, called turn, called a $1,000 jam on the river with just a pair of 7s. He said out loud before the call that he pegged his opponent for ace king and was absolutely right. So we're going to be versing someone without fear in the next one. But playing a wild style, his stack has dwindled to about 1K. I have about $1,200 in my stack when I look down at pocket aces in the cutoff. The player to my right actually looked like he wanted to raise and then just called. I did think that was quite weird at the time, but it's definitely not going to influence my decision making at this point. I'm in the cutoff, I have aces, I raise to $30. The small blind decides to call before the hijack raises to $125. So we are in the dream spot. We have aces, we're in a 3-bet pot so far. And now we remember that our opponent looked like he wanted to raise pre and instead chose a limp raise. So we think that he is very, very strong. We see he has a history of calling with almost anything. Additionally, the player to the left of me, you can see has about $70 total in his stack. So I actually think jamming here for about $1,000 is the play. I think it makes it look like I'm trying to isolate the short stack, get the 125 of dead money in there. And knowing this opponent will call 3 bets with queen 7 and pretty much any 2 cards, I think he'll just get it in here with a weaker than normal range. So when I announce all in for the $1,000 effective,
it's very expensive.
It's very expensive.
the player to my left pretty much snap goes all in, and then the player to my right asks me if we would go once or twice. I respond asking him if he's going to call, and he just says he wants to know if we're going to go once or twice. And I tell him, as I would tell anyone, I'm always a 2 times guy no matter what, no matter if I have aces in pre. And once I say that I'm willing to go twice with him, he slides in the call. And after the dealer starts to manage the side pot and the regular pot, I show my hand, reveal I have pocket aces, At this point, my opponent says he knew it and it's just a cooler, and he says that he has pocket kings. He eventually does show it, so we do see we're against kings for a massive side pot. Not really too concerned about the main because a side pot is going to be over $2,000. First flop of Jack 10, 9. My opponent actually has a ton more outs. Any queen is a win. Turn is a 7. Now any 8 is a chop. Brick on the river, so we hold on the first board. Second board, all low cards. Turn 6, we just need to fade one king for a massive pot, and it's a queen. We end up being on the right side of a massive cooler at this game, and it's possible that the Orange City curse is officially over for me. On the next fun hand of poker, I look down at pocket jacks from the big blind. With one limp, the button makes it $25. My 3-bets have been getting a little too much respect, I think. And I've been doing it quite often, so expecting the button to have absolute trash a lot of the time, I think I'm going to just call this one, put a stronger hand in my calling range, and mix it up just a little bit. When I call the limper calls, we're 3 ways to a flop of 8, 7, 6, 2 spades. Not my favorite, but we do have an overpair, and we do have the jack of spades to fall back on. I check it in flow, and it checks through. I am extremely confident I have the best hand here, but the turn is the ace of diamonds. At this point, I'm kicking myself. I've probably just given away this pot based on being way too passive. When I check, it checks to the button who bets $35. Well, I played it so passively, we're definitely going to call one street, see what develops. But the middle position player decides to call as well, so we're going 3 ways to a river card, which is the ace of hearts. Now, in theory, this means it should be way less likely that my opponents have an ace. But in reality, I don't think that really matters that much because sometimes they just wake up with an ace anyway. So I check. I will make my decision based on my opponent's sizing. When the middle position player checks and then the button checks, I just fast roll my hand. I think I should be good here a lot of the time. I think if the middle position player had an ace, he would lead some of the time. And when I fast roll, both players pretty quickly fold. So the passive line, I do think, gained us an extra $70, $35 a piece on the turn. So may have gotten a little bit of extra value, but definitely a lot more stress than I needed to on this hand. Which brings us to the final hand of note. I'm in the big blind with pocket queens. When there's a straddle from the cutoff to be able to get back in the hand, it folds to me and I make it $35. There is one caller, and then the hijack makes it $125 and it folds back to me. The player to my left only has about $400 in his stack. The player in the hijack has about $600. The hijack additionally have been playing very aggressive and gotten coolered a few times. He's probably down like $3,000 on the day. So I expect him to be tilting a lot more than usual and believe he'll call off slightly lighter for this $600 jam. Additionally, my 4-bet jamming range would be aces, kings, queens, ace, king suited, sometimes ace, queen, and sometimes jacks. So barely balanced here as I'm not always going to 4-bet rip with just aces. We're getting in there with queens as well. This way the pocket kings could never fold to the $1,000 jam in the future. Player to my left gets out of the way and the hijack makes the call. I ask if he wants to run it once or twice. He says up to me. I'm always a 2 times guy every time no matter what. And on the first flop of ace, king, 5.
Oh, come on!
Well, that one's probably not going to me almost ever. Unless my opponent somehow has pocket jacks or pocket 10s, we're probably losing this one. King of clubs, 7 of clubs. I look down. My queens do not have a club. And on the second board of 10, 8, 4, we feel pretty good about that. 7, river, ace. And now my opponent flips over ace, queen. You know, we run it twice to reduce variance so that the absolute trash call off of ace, queen to a 4-bet rip is just like supposed to chop sometimes. Not even often, but sometimes. But they're certainly not supposed to scoop against queens. So that hand made us lose $600. Upon checking in with myself mentally, I am super tilted at this point. Actually extremely angry. And decide instead of pushing it and forcing stuff to try to get the money back, we're just going to rack up and head out. We're into the game for $1,300, out of the game for $2,020, which is a profit of $720 across 5 hours equates to $144 an hour or 28 big blinds an hour. I feel like it's been forever since I ran super well at Orange City. Truthfully, walking into it, I felt like the last several times I played, I'd always just got buried. And today there wasn't like a whole lot of skill edge here. I just hit a bunch of sets, probably overplayed them, but in the long term in game flow, when you're able to punish your opponent's aggression with a bunch of re-raises or jams, it's going to slow them down a whole lot more and make them play a little bit more your game and less their own. Aces into kings, always a welcome sight, even better when they hold. And you know, I got to see the other side of the coin. Ace queen into queens and the ace queen wins 2 times. That one was pretty gross, but at least that one was a little bit smaller than the aces into kings. So that's one of the reasons we're still profitable on the day. If you've made all to this point, thank you. I appreciate it. Please consider liking. It helps me out a great deal, and I will see you on the next one.